Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mead Made. Today is part 2 of our Resin 101 series. Today I am going to go over all of the basics that you need to know to be able to slice your files and get them printing. So we're going to be jumping into Chitubox and start supporting our models. So when you first open up Chitubox, this is what you're going to find. You're going to have a little hamburger icon here in the top left corner where you can open projects, save them, and get into some settings. This first icon is your open file, and this is where we're going to go to bring in files. Then you actually have your save project. Then for some reason there is screenshots and recordings, so you can actually record what you're doing in Chitubox. Personally, I've never used it because I have my own screen recording software that I use. Then you've got your back button and your redo button, and the rest are functionalities when you actually have some models in here. You've got copy, you've got auto layout, hollowing, and I have already done a video on hollowing, and I'll put that video right here for you. Then there is dig a hole, and that is also in that same video. And then repair. Then on your left side, you've actually got your functionality tools for moving and altering your models. So you've got the move tool, you've got rotate, you've got scale, and you've got mirror, which is essentially a flip. The nice thing is as you see, if you move your mouse over any icon in Chitubox and hold it, they have this nice little box that will pop up and show you exactly what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the open file and bring in my files. And this is the actual model that I'm going to be using today from Chibi STL. And I'll go ahead and throw a link in the description of where you can get this model. And the great thing is, if you actually sign up for Chibi STL, this is part of the welcome package, so you will automatically get it if you sign up for his Patreon. So once you bring them in, it does this cool little animation drop for you. So if you looked at the image of what this model is, it actually had measurements and it showed you how big this thing was. So I am not going to be printing this full size, and honestly, Chibi STL and 3DXM, which is the same artist, he always makes his models pretty massive, but I'm always scaling them down. But before we get into that, being able to move around in Chitubox is really important. So the main functions that you need to know to move around here is your scroll wheel on your mouse will actually zoom you in and out, and that is a very useful one. And if you have a laptop, that's just usually, at least for me on a Mac, it's 2 fingers in and out, sliding up and down. Now, the other thing is your pan, and all you do is click with your left mouse click button, and click and drag, and that will pan around so you can move around your object. And the same thing if you're on a laptop, that's just a regular single click, and you can move that around. Now the other thing is your spin. So that is just a right click. So I'm right clicking, holding that down and dragging around, and this allows me to spin my model around. So in the combination of zooming in, spinning around, and panning, those are the main things you need to know to be able to get around in Chitubox. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to scale all of this. I'm going to see right here that everything is selected, hit scale, and then scale to fit. And that will automatically scale my entire model to fit my build plate. So the one thing I do know, I am going to scale this up to 56%. So now everything is at 56 because I have lock ratio aspect and everything is selected over here where it says select all. Now I can uncheck this and only click one thing at a time and scale these one at a time. Because when your models are unselected, they are gray. When they are selected, they are blue. So now what I'm going to do is click right here on the auto layout, and this is just to easily separate everything so I'm not just clicking and dragging. Then I'm going to click on the center. And there we go. So now I have everything moved away from each other, and how I'm going to do this is actually going to be two separate prints. I'm going to print the base in one print, and then I'm going to print Venom and Spider-Man in another print. So this will be one, and then this will be another. The nice thing about Chitubox is when it is out of your area of printing, it will actually turn red. So if you see that this blue box, like if I did this right now, it would literally just print this right to the edge. And you don't want to do that. You really just want to use the red to identify that something is out or if it's in. If just the tips of these fingers were red, I would know that I would have to bring this in. And I'm not painting his nails, it's just out of bounds. So it wouldn't print. So doing something like that would bring me right back into the printing boundaries, and this would print wonderfully. So the next thing I need to do is hollow my models. I'm going to quickly go through this because I've already made the video explaining how I hollow my models. So I'm going to click all of these and hollow them all at once. So I click on the top one, hold shift, and then click on the bottom one. Then I just go over here to hollow and start. Then once that process is complete, I just double check, and I take my slider bar over here on the right hand side and drag that down to see if it actually hollowed. So I can see here the tongue actually hollowed in the Venom head here, but it was not really that thick enough to hollow much of Venom himself. And all of the other pieces look really good. So now I'm going to dig out my holes, and this is just to make sure that I get a good amount of drainage. So the other thing is for this tongue, I'm going to bring my size down, and I'm going to put it in some areas that are low visibility, and also places that will be easy to sand. I think the other side, it'll be a lot easier if maybe I just put one here right in the side, and I can always putty that up and plug it up easily. And there we go. So now I have everything that needs to have a hole with a hole. That way we can clean out the insides of our model and we don't have any uncured resin on the inside of it. Once we get to this point, we are ready to start supporting our models. Now, if you've noticed, we've been on this tab the entire time. So before we click on our support tab, we're going to click a model. So we're going to start with our legs. And a couple things to note before you actually start jumping over to the support tab. You want to look at how it's positioned. And if we click on our top view right here, it will jump us directly to the top view. Now you can click these arrows to jump to the different sides. So I can go to front, I can go to left, and you just keep doing that. And if you're on the top or bottom, the arrows will actually rotate it for you. So we're going to stay on the top. The other thing is if you actually lose your positioning or something like that, or maybe it's just way off, you can click your home button and that will bring you back to this view. So let's go to our top, and then if you click this eyeball, this is actually perspective, and I recommend keeping perspective turned off because you can see how it looks like it actually passes your build plate when you're looking at it from the top. But when you click this, this is without perspective, and you can see that it is fitting within your build plate. So now to come to this guy, our legs, we're going to go to our front view, and we don't want this to just be right here flat. We want it to angle it. So I'm going to click on my rotate tool, and then I'm going to just rotate this, because we don't want any kind of flat edges, because then we have to put a ton of supports here. We want it to be angled. So you can see here I've angled this, but I'm actually going to angle this even more because I'm looking at this knee. I want it pointing up. I don't want a flat surface. It does have a bit of a round, but I want more of a round. So I'm going to angle that up to where that leg has a nice slope going up. So you can see here, that is kind of how I'm going to do him. Here he is. When you jump over to your support tab, you can see that it actually automatically lifts it off of the build plate for me to add supports. And that is your Z lift height. I go between 3 and 5. Now you don't want it super close, so 3 is usually the minimum that I go. And then you can change between your medium or your heavy supports. So when it comes to my first supports, I always go with a heavy. So I'm going to click heavy, and then I'm going to click here right on the bottom corner and click that. So that way this actually prints right on the corner. Now I'm not worried about the edges because this is a connection point, and I'm just going to sand that down. So I'm going to go ahead and on each edge put a couple heavies on it. So I'm going to put one here, I'm going to put one here, same thing here, here, and move over, and here, here, and actually one over on this corner, because this corner has an overhang. So now I actually have this very well supported, and the reason why I use heavies first is because I want a really strong connection here, because this is going to hold the majority of the weight of your model, because you have to remember that this is hanging upside down. So I want a very strong connection when it first starts. And the other part is when there's islands. And what an island is let's bring this down and I'll show you. And what an island is when it's printing out in the middle of nowhere with nothing attached to it. So you can see right here, these have two islands right here. So it's got one right here and one right here. So I'm going to support it at a heavy right at the bottom of this. And I'm going to try to do it to where it's not interacting too much with the model. That way I can take it off and sand this off really easily. And then the same thing with this piece over here. And the way you can check it is you just got to bring it down. What you want is your support touching the actual model, the very first few layers. And you can see it's connected really well. And then moving up, it's just going to get more and more. Now, with something like this, I'm going to switch to some lights, go underneath it, and do the same thing along the edge. Then I'm going to move over and do the same thing on this one. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not putting supports right here. Because the more supports you put on the outside of your model, the more sanding and cleanup you're going to have to do. So doing this minimizes the cleanup and ensures you're going to have a nicer, cleaner print.
Alright, real quick, I just gotta say it. Thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people for supporting me on Patreon this month. And if you want to be like these awesome people, you would get exclusive access to my private Discord channels where we talk about 3D printing, painting 3D prints, and just showing off some awesome works of art. But you'll also get access to my behind the scenes content, my exclusive Patreon only tutorials, and get to vote on the videos that I make during the month. This Resin 101 series is actually what my patrons voted for last month, and I'm still working on it. If you're interested, the information's below. Other than that, let's get back to this video.
Now, I'm very liberal when it comes to the first few layers of my actual prints when it's just starting to print, because I want a really good hold, so when it's hanging upside down, it's not moving at all when it's dipping in and out of the resin. So then I just move this back up, and then I'm also going to just keep doing this along the edge and right where these contacts are, because it's going to be very thin when it starts to connect. Then I'm going to take some mediums just to give a little bit of an overkill. I'm going to put just a couple on the faces of this model. I'm going to put a couple on the faces right where the pegs are. So then all I'm going to do is keep sliding up to see if I see any more islands. And there are no more islands on this model, which is a great thing. But you can see the red is denoting your overhang, to where it probably needs some type of supports. So this is when I switch over to my lights, and I'm just going to put a couple right here to just help when it's got this overhang. Then I'm going to move over here and do the same thing. I'm just going to put one here, and I'll put one right here. So there you go. So then I'm going to just keep going up, and everything should be fine with that. Now right here, there's a little bit, so I'm going to put just one right here and one right here. Now the one thing is once these start to get taller, I never do just one. Because if I did this, I've got this one pillar that is going all the way up. It could be wobbly, go back and forth, and you just have to make sure, because you want all of your supports to be nice and strong. So you could, if you just want one support right here, you could just click on a support and support your actual supports. So actually this would be perfectly fine too. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it like that. Now this one is all the way done, so when I'm done with that, I just click back over here to my settings, and it will bring me to all of my models. Now an important thing to note, you can still, once it's supported, you can move this around, and you can move it on your build plate. You can even rotate this to make it fit good. So if you're arranging a lot of models at once, you can spin them around. But the one thing you can't do is you can't scale it, because it will say this. It's going to delete your supports. So do you want to delete your supports and scale it, or do you not want to? So I do not want to. So make sure that you have all of your scaling right and your positioning with the rotation in the proper way before you support, because you will lose all of your supports. So now I'm just going to go ahead and start to go through this, and if there's anything to note, I'll stop and explain it, but let's just speed through this and I'm going to support everything. So I have the head done. Now I'm going to do the torso. So first I'm going to move this away just so I can kind of see it a lot better. And you got to just kind of look at your model and see what is the best way to position this. So I am going to probably move this up like this. That way it's printing up and everything is up at an angle, especially with these fingers. I'm going to have to support this and this little thing right here, but all of the fingers should support should be able to go without supports. So you can see how the tip of this finger right here is going to need it. But I can always rotate it as well a little more. Bring that up. So no matter what I do, I'm going to have to do that. So I'm going to not make it as harsh now, because I know I have to support it, so at least I don't have to support these two fingers. And those two print just fine. So then bringing it back down through, I know I'm going to have to support every finger and thumb, and that is perfectly fine because they're nice and smooth and I'll be able to sand these really well. So now all I'm going to do is move this back over here and jump to my supports and get started on that. And it's the exact same process. I'm going to go in here and get my heavy supports and put one right at the tip of each finger. Then I'm going to take my light supports and work on any of these small little islands. So you can see here in the hand, there are a couple little islands here that I'm going to have to support. The arm right here where it actually comes all the way out before it connects, it's going to need some type of support because that comes out way too far. So what I'm going to do is take some mediums and I'm going to take it right out here where it has the most stress on the model and just put a couple of them right here. Then what I'm going to do is go into my lights and just kind of keep supporting that along the way just so it's a nice strong structure. But the thing I'm doing is I'm making sure that they're connected. So you can see that this connection bridge right here. So I want them close enough to where it's going to be a really nice strong support. That way that this is going to give it enough structure to where it will keep that weight when it's pulling off of the FEP. And another thing here, so if you see that the fingertip right here, it doesn't make a very big piece before it connects, and then it's actually a part of the whole hand. So there are times where I am not going to use a heavy because it's not necessary, because I don't need to hold a lot of weight. So what I'll do is I'll use a medium support, click it right at the tip here, and then just put a light right here. That way it keeps it held together before it connects. And then I'm also going to put one right over here on this side, a light, to where before it connects, this area right here is really stable. And when it is going back and forth, it stays in place, and that will help reduce some of those layer lines you sometimes get. And then seeing these, they don't go out too far, and it's a very wide surface. So there's a lot of surface area here attached to it. So I'm not concerned here, and I don't need to put a support right there. And this is something over time you just kind of realize that, yes, it is red, but looking at the model, I don't really need to support that. And there we go. Now we have the torso fully supported. So the last thing we have is the Venom head. And first, kind of look at it, make sure I got the right angle. I don't want this to be sitting flat, so what I'm going to do is click the rotate button, and then I'm going to rotate it back a little bit, and then to the side, to the back right there. That way it's just on the point, so you can see how it would be printing. And just by checking my model like that, I could see that this actually needs a hole right here. And there we go. So just like all the rest, I'm going to go ahead and support it. But you can see that these teeth are going to be a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead, ignore that for right now, and come all the way to the bottom and just focus on one little bit at a time. So I'm going to add a heavy around the edges. And this is a big area, so I want to make sure I have enough of a connection and it's strong enough to hold this big surface area. So this is one thing that I do to prevent layer lines at the very bottom of my models. Now, what I first have to do is really look at the amount. So let's switch over to support and show you. So this is a large surface area. So it is going to be having a lot of suction, because you can see here that it's actually printing all of this. So like this is going to have a lot of a suction when it pulls off, and that is where you can have the actual risk of getting lines in your model or even breaking supports. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to just add a hole straight through my model. Now I can also be a little smart about this, because I do know that there is certain areas that Spider-Man is going to be covering. So his head is going to be setting right here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a smaller hole, not that big, straight through the model. And I might have to make my depth a lot more. So there we go. So now I got a hole right there, and that will actually relieve a lot of that surface tension. But now I'm going to go ahead with some lights and kind of just come through and add sporadically. And this is just to help with the supports. And then out here I'm going to add just a couple heavies, because it's really, I just want this thing to not move whatsoever. And this is something you pick up over time of how much you should really be adding, because sometimes you can get away with just a little bit. And this might seem like a lot, but it's still a pretty light amount of supports for this model. But we're using a combination of heavy supports, medium supports, and light supports. So now everything is good until I start getting to the curve of the tongue, and I'm going to go ahead and just put a heavy support right there, and then light support surrounding it. Okay, so now the tongue is all done. Now it's time to move on to these teeth. And I'm not going to mess around. I am just going to put a heavy support at each one. But this is the thing, I'm going to actually bring this up just so I'm only going to be seeing these teeth. Okay, so now we have Venom all supported. Jumping back, I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to see here that he is actually off the build plate. I'm going to just move him around. And now I'm wondering if I can actually fit everything on the build plate. I'd have to print this at a pretty harsh angle, but I could support it enough. Alright, so I am going to attempt to print all of this on one build plate. So I'm going to go ahead and start slicing this guy. Now, when it comes to the angles going up this way, I'm not too concerned. It's really anything coming down. That's where I'm going to have my islands. So first I'm going to go ahead and support this like crazy, because this is going to be heavy. So I am going to just keep supporting this. So now I have everything actually supported, and all I'm going to do is hit the slice button, and it says I'm exceeding the build plate, and it's this spot right here. Let's see if that does it. But now I gotta make sure I'm not hitting Venom right here. It's close. And this time I hit the slice button and everything is on the build plate. Okay, so once you slice it, you can actually see your 3D models all supported. And then on the right is actually your export of the screen. So this is your preview of what your prints will look like layer by layer. I honestly hardly really look at these. I usually scrub through them to make sure I don't see any craziness going through it. But for the most part, you can see on this side, this is actually what it's going to be looking like layer by layer. And this is the single layer view of what it is actually printing for this specific layer. So now I'm just going to go ahead and hit save to my USB drive, and then it's going to go through the process of actually writing it to the USB drive, and from there it is ready to go to the 3D printer.
So now you have the basic foundations to support your models properly and print them without failures, hopefully. Now it's time for part 3 of this series. And this is all going to be focused around the safety concerns for resin 3D printing. So, we'll go ahead and I'll see you in that next video.